50 biggest banks in the world, over the last 5 years, that is the 5 years since the Paris Agreement was adopted, poured $3.8 trillion into the fossil fuel sector.
That's enough to numb most of us. What is it that the oil companies and the gas and coal companies can do that they would not have been able to do without that financing?
I mean, basically everything. Oil, gas, and coal companies rely to different extents on bank financing. The bigger companies with deeper pockets might rely on the banks less. But at the end of the day, these banks provide critical access to capital that allows the fossil fuel companies to exist.
So, Alison, what you're saying is that the amount of money that the banks are lending the fossil fuel companies is greater now than it was when the Paris Agreement was signed.
Exactly. And that, should be shocking to everyone because that's absolutely the wrong direction.
But aren't you asking private corporations to take action which really may hurt their bottom line in a way that shareholders won't like very much?
There's actually incredible shareholder pressure for these banks to act more than we've ever seen before. Last May at JP Morgan Chase's annual meeting, nearly 50% of its shareholders voted in favor of JP Morgan Chase producing some sort of plan about how it was going to reduce the emissions from its financing.
Wow.
The bank cannot ignore something that nearly half of its shareholders tell it to do.
When you talk about ending bank lending for fossil fuel companies, people are going to get a little bit scared, that we just can't live without it for now. Maybe in the future, yes, but not for now.
Right, and that's why our focus really is on bank financing for the expansion of the sector needs to stop. That means, no new projects or companies that are expanding the sector, financing to them needs to end unless those expansion plans are reined in. And then we need banks to, come up with transparent, stringent, and verifiable plans to phase out their financing for fossil fuels in a way that does protect communities and people that are dependent on fossil fuels.
What you're saying then, with no new projects, is that the amount of oil and gas that we currently have access to with existing projects is enough to meet the world's needs for the next, whatever, this decade or two.
Exactly. We can, deal with what we've got out of the ground. We don't need to be exploring for new fossil fuel reserves at this time.
A lot of people are going to read what you've written in your report and say, okay, it sounds really awful, really bad, really scary. What am I supposed to do about it?
We've seen a lot of people start to move their money out of these big fossil fuel banks, and that is a great step, though I'd say don't do it quietly. Make sure that the bank knows why you're moving your money. Call your branch manager, your account manager, get 10 friends to do it with you. But more than moving, just your bank account, we need the banks to be hearing that this kind of activity is not okay and that their clients and just the general public, won't accept it.
The climate movement has made the fossil fuel companies the boogeyman on this issue. Is this an attempt to kind of like shift some of that energy in the direction of the banks and make them the bad guy?
The fossil fuel companies are absolute villains in this story, but in that metaphor, you could call the banks at the very least bystanders, allowing the villains to be villains, facilitating the villains being villains, if not being villains themselves. We're starting to see law students say that they don't want to work at law firms that are representing fossil fuel companies. It's just another example of if you are in some way holding up the fossil fuel economy, you're on the wrong side of history.